Shazan has $30,000 to invest. He puts some of the money in a bond fund that pays 5% simple interest, and he puts the rest in a stock fund that pays 8% simple interest. If he earned $2,070 in interest after 1 year, how much did he invest in the stock fund, and how much did he invest in the bond fund? Since they're asking us how much he invested in the stock fund and how much he invested in the bond fund, our variables are going to represent those two quantities. So we're going to let the amount invested in the stock fund be X, and we're going to let the amount invested in the bond fund be Y. And once we have our let statements, we're ready to set up a table to organize the information. For an interest problem, we know the relationship is principal times rate equals interest, so long as time is 1. And in all of the problems we'll do, time will be 1. So principal times rate equals interest. And the two different accounts were the stock fund and the bond fund. So I'm going to label the rows stock and bond. That's how we differentiate them. And then we'll fill in the chart. We need to start in the upper left-hand corner. We've got the principal in the stock fund. And if we look at our let statement, we said that the amount invested in the stock fund was X. So that means that this quantity is X. And then the principal for the bond fund, that's the amount invested, is going to be Y. The rate for the stock fund, we're told, is 8%, and as a decimal, that's 0.08. The rate for the bond fund is 5%, so that's 0.05. And because interest is principal times rate, we can multiply in each row the principal times the rate to get what goes in the interest cell. So in the first row, x times 0.08 is 0.08x. And in the second row, y times 0.05 is 0.05y. Once we've filled in the table, we're ready to set up a system of equations that models the situation. So at this point, I go back to the problem to look and see what information we haven't used yet. In this case, it says that Shazan has $30,000 to invest. I look at the table, and I generally ask myself, is that a principal, a rate, or an interest? And since it's an amount that's getting invested, it's a principal. And in fact, it's the total principal. So I'm going to put that at the bottom of the principal column, 30,000. The other number that we haven't used yet is the $2,070 in interest. And because that's the total interest earned on both of the accounts, I'm going to put that at the bottom of the interest column. So that's going to be 2,070. And the two equations that model the situation will come from the information in the principal column and also in the interest column. From the principal column, we can see that x plus y equals 30,000 because x and y were the amounts invested in each fund. And in total, he had 30,000 to invest, so we know those two have to add up to 30,000. And then in the interest column, the total interest was $2,070. So if we take the interest for each of the different funds and add them together, that should be 2,070. So we have 0.08x plus 0.05y equals 2070. And now we have our system of equations. Once we solve this, we'll know the values for x and y, and we'll know the answer to the problem. I generally solve these problems using substitution. You can also use elimination, but substitution's just the way that I do things. If you look at the first equation, x and y don't have any leading coefficients except for the invisible ones. So it's easy to isolate x or y in the first equation and use that for our substitution. I'm going to get y alone first. So what I'm going to do to get y alone, I have to subtract x from both sides. And when I do that, the equation becomes y equals 30,000 minus x. And at this point, because I know that y is equal to 30,000 minus x, wherever I see a y in the other equation, I'm going to replace that with 30,000 minus x. When I do that, the second equation becomes 0.08x plus 0.05 times, and instead of y, I'm going to write 30,000 minus x, and that equals 2070. To solve this, I distribute the 0.05. This gives me 0.08x plus 0.05 times 30,000 is 1,500 minus 0.05x equals 2070. At this point, I can combine like terms on the left-hand side. 0.08x minus 0.05x is 0.03x. So I have 0.03x plus 1,500 equals 2070. If I subtract 1,500 from both sides, that gives me 0.03x equals 570. And if I divide both sides by 0.03, this gives me x equals 19,000. So already, going back to the let statements, I know that the amount invested in the stock fund, which was x, is now $19,000. There are two ways to figure out how much was invested in the bond fund. We know that he invested $30,000 in total, and he invested $19,000 in the stock fund. If we take away the $19,000 from the $30,000 in total, that gives us $11,000 left to invest in the bond fund. Or we can use substitution. We knew that y was 30,000 minus x. Now that we've figured out x is 19,000, we can subtract, and 30,000 minus 19,000 is 11,000. It's the same answer that we got before. So to state our conclusion, they asked how much did he invest in the stock fund and how much did he invest in the bond fund. We can say he invested $19,000 in the stock fund and $11,000 in the bond fund. And that is our final answer.